Marcus wiped down the last glass behind the bar counter, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision. The old tavern had seen better days, its wooden floors scarred by decades of boots and bar fights, walls yellowed by cigarette smoke from when smoking was still allowed indoors. Tonight felt different, though. There was tension in the air that made even the regular customers speak in hushed tones. The door burst open with a violent crash, causing everyone to look up from their drinks. A group of leather-clad bikers strutted in, their heavy boots echoing against the worn floorboards. The leader, a massive man with arms covered in crude tattoos and a beard that reached his chest, surveyed the room like a predator sizing up prey. His jacket bore the insignia of the Iron Wolves, a motorcycle club notorious for leaving destruction in their wake. "Well, well," the leader sneered, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent bar. "Look what we have here. A nice quiet little place full of sheep." His gang laughed behind him, the sound harsh and menacing. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He had heard stories about the Iron Wolves, how they would roll into small towns and terrorize locals for sport. In the corner booth sat a young woman named Sarah, celebrating her birthday with 2 friends. She had chosen this place specifically because it was supposed to be safe, quiet. Her friends, Jenny and Mike, shifted uncomfortably as the bikers spread out through the bar, claiming tables and ordering drinks in voices too loud for the intimate space. The leader's eyes landed on Sarah's table, and a cruel smile spread across his face. He nudged one of his companions, a thin man with a spider web tattooed across his neck. "Look at that pretty little thing over there," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Bet she's never seen a real man before." Sarah tried to ignore them, focusing on her conversation with her friends, but she could feel their eyes on her. The atmosphere in the bar had shifted completely. Other patrons were quietly finishing their drinks and leaving, not wanting to get caught in whatever was about to unfold. Marcus continued cleaning glasses, but his movements had become more deliberate, more careful. He had worked in bars for 30 years and had developed a sixth sense for trouble. These men weren't just looking for drinks. They were looking for entertainment, and in his experience, that usually meant someone was going to get hurt. The spiderweb tattoo man approached Sarah's table first, his boots clicking deliberately on the floor. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said, leaning against their table with false casualness. "Mind if me and my boys join you? This is a pretty small place and we're feeling friendly tonight." "We're fine, thank you," Sarah replied politely but firmly, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her spine. Jenny grabbed her purse ready to leave, but Mike put a protective hand on Sarah's shoulder. "I don't think the lady is interested," Mike said, trying to keep his voice calm and non-confrontational. He was a computer programmer, not a fighter, but he couldn't just sit there while these men intimidated his friend. The biker's expression darkened. "I wasn't talking to you, boy," he growled. "In fact, I don't remember asking for your opinion at all." The leader had now joined his companion, towering over their table like a mountain of leather and malice. "Come on now," the leader said, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "We're just being friendly. No need to be rude to guests." He reached out and touched Sarah's hair, causing her to flinch away. "Such pretty hair. Bet it smells real nice, too." The tension in the bar had become unbearable. Marcus reached under the counter where he kept a baseball bat, but he knew it would be useless against this many men. He considered calling the police, but by the time they arrived, it would be too late. "Please just leave us alone," Sarah said, her voice starting to shake. "We don't want any trouble." "Trouble?" The leader laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Who said anything about trouble? We're just having a conversation. Although..." He paused dramatically, looking around the bar at the few remaining customers who were pretending not to watch. "It seems like this place could use a little excitement." In the back corner of the bar, unnoticed by the bikers, sat an older man. He appeared to be in his 60s with silver hair and a beard neatly trimmed. He wore a simple flannel shirt and jeans, looking like any other regular customer. He had been quietly nursing a beer and reading a paperback novel when the bikers arrived. Unlike the other patrons, he hadn't moved to leave. Instead, he continued reading, occasionally turning a page as if nothing unusual was happening. The leader grabbed Mike's shoulder and pushed him back into his seat when he tried to stand. "Sit down, hero," he snarled. "Adults are talking." He turned back to Sarah, his eyes roaming over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "You know what? I think you're coming with us tonight. My boys and I are having a party and we need some entertainment." "She's not going anywhere with you," Mike said, standing up despite the hand still gripping his shoulder. The leader's expression turned dangerous and several other bikers began moving closer to their table. "Oh, really?" the leader said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "And who exactly is going to stop us? You?" He looked around the bar mockingly. "Maybe the old bartender over there? Or one of these other sheep who are too scared to even look our way?" The man in the corner closed his book and set it gently on the table. He took a slow sip of his beer, then stood up with the measured movements of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. As he rose, his flannel shirt shifted slightly, revealing just a glimpse of something on his forearm, the edge of what looked like a tattoo. "Let's see who can save you." The biker leader taunted, his voice rising as he looked directly at Mike. "I'll give anyone in this bar one chance to speak up. One chance to play hero." His gang laughed and jeered, feeding off their leader's aggression. The older man began walking slowly toward their table, his footsteps quiet, but deliberate. Something about his approach made the hair on Marcus's arms stand up. There was a quality to the man's movement, a controlled precision that spoke of training and experience. As he drew closer, the fluorescent lights caught more of his forearm, revealing intricate details of what was clearly a military tattoo. The biker leader was too caught up in his taunting to notice the approaching figure. "That's what I thought," he continued, his voice full of contempt. "A bar full of cowards and sheep. Well, sweetheart," he said, turning back to Sarah, "looks like nobody's coming to save you after all." That's when the man with the silver hair cleared his throat softly behind him. The biker leader turned around slowly, a sneer already forming on his lips. He expected to see another frightened local. Maybe someone finally worked up enough courage to beg them to leave. Instead, he found himself looking at a man who seemed completely calm, almost relaxed. The stranger's gray eyes held no fear, no anger, just a quiet assessment that made the leader suddenly uncomfortable. "Excuse me," the older man said politely, his voice carrying the hint of a southern accent. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Seems like there might be a misunderstanding here." The leader's sneer widened. This was better than he had hoped. Someone actually thought they could intervene. "Oh, look, boys," he called out to his gang. "We got ourselves a hero after all." The other bikers chuckled and moved closer, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. "I'm not looking for trouble," the stranger continued, his hands relaxed at his sides. "But I think these young folks would prefer to finish their evening in peace." "Would they now?" the leader mocked. "And I suppose you're going to make sure that happens?" "You in what army, old man?" Sarah watched the exchange with growing dread. This kind stranger was about to get himself seriously hurt trying to help them. She wanted to tell him to walk away, to not risk himself for people he didn't even know, but her voice seemed frozen in her throat. The older man smiled slightly, an expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No army needed," he said simply. "Just a conversation between reasonable people." This response seemed to enrage the leader even more. He was used to fear, to people backing down or running away. This calm defiance was something new, and it made him want to reassert his dominance even more forcefully. "Conversation?" the leader spat. "The only conversation happening here is me telling this little lady she's coming with us, and everyone else minding their own damn business." He took a step closer to the stranger, using his considerable height advantage to try to intimidate. "So why don't you just turn around and walk back to your corner before you get hurt?" The stranger didn't move, didn't even seem to tense up. "I'm afraid I can't do that," he said calmly. "You see, I took an oath a long time ago, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves." "An oath?" The leader laughed harshly. "What are you, some kind of cop?" He looked the man up and down, taking in the casual clothes and silver hair. "You're a little old to be playing policeman, don't you think?" "Not a cop," the stranger replied. "Something else." The spiderweb tattoo biker had been silent during this exchange, but now he spoke up. "Boss, maybe we should just grab the girl and go. This guy's giving me the creeps." The leader whirled on his subordinate. "Giving you the creeps? He's just some old fool who watches too many movies." He turned back to the stranger. "Last chance, Grandpa. Walk away, or my boys and I are going to teach you what happens to people who stick their nose where it doesn't belong." The older man reached up slowly and began rolling up the sleeves of his flannel shirt. As the fabric pulled back, more of his tattoo became visible. It wasn't like the crude prison ink or biker tattoos scattered across the gang members' bodies. This was something different entirely, precise, detailed. Professional, you know, the stranger said conversationally as he continued rolling up his sleeve. I served 3 tours in places most people can't even pronounce. Saw things that would give you nightmares. Learned things that... He paused, the sleeve now fully rolled back. The spiderweb biker was the first to see it clearly. His face went white and he actually took a step backward. Boss, he whispered urgently. Look at his arm. The leader glanced down dismissively, then looked again, his expression changing rapidly from contempt to confusion to something approaching fear. There, covering the stranger's entire forearm, was a tattoo of an eagle. But this wasn't just any eagle. It was perched on top of an anchor, with wings spread wide and talons gripping a ribbon that bore words in Latin. Below it, smaller but no less significant, was a skull and crossbones with a number that made the leader's blood run cold. Oh shit, one of the other bikers breathed. Several of them had served time in various prisons and had learned to read tattoos like a language. They knew what they were looking at, and it terrified them. The leader tried to maintain his composure, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Nice ink, old man. Real artistic. The stranger finished rolling up his other sleeve, revealing more military tattoos, dates, coordinates, unit numbers that told the story of a man who had seen combat in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Thank you, he said simply. Each one has a story. Marcus behind the bar had stopped all pretense of working and was watching intently. He had a nephew who had served in the Marines, and he recognized some of those symbols. This quiet customer wasn't just any veteran. The tattoo suggested someone who had been part of special operations, the kind of soldier who operated in the shadows and whose missions never made the news. Sarah noticed the change in the biker's demeanor immediately. The cocky confidence had evaporated, replaced by nervous glances and fidgeting. Even their leader seemed unsure of himself now. Look, the leader said, trying to salvage the situation. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. No need for things to get ugly. The stranger nodded thoughtfully. I agree completely. No need for ugliness at all. He paused, his gray eyes fixed on the leader. So I suggest you and your friends finish your drinks and move along. Let these folks enjoy their evening. And if we don't want to leave just yet? The leader asked, though his heart was no longer in the challenge. The older man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle readiness that every man with combat experience would recognize. Well, he said quietly, then we might have to discuss this further. And I should probably mention that talking has never been my strongest skill. The spiderweb biker tugged at his leader's jacket. Come on, man. Let's just go. This place is a dump anyway. But the leader couldn't lose face completely in front of his gang. He had built his reputation on intimidation and violence, and backing down from one old man would undermine everything he had worked to establish. You think those pretty tattoos scare me? He snarled, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. I've put plenty of military boys in the hospital. You bleeding heart soldier boys are all the same, too worried about rules and honor to fight dirty. The stranger's smile became genuinely amused. Oh, son, he said softly. Where I learned to fight, there weren't any rules at all. The air in the bar became electric with tension. Several patrons who had been trying to quietly slip out now found themselves frozen, unwilling to move and potentially trigger whatever was about to happen. Marcus gripped his baseball bat tighter, though he suspected it would be about as useful as a toothpick in whatever was coming. The biker leader looked around at his gang, seeing doubt creeping into their faces. He had built his reputation on being the toughest, most ruthless member of the Iron Wolves. But there was something about this older man that defied everything he understood about confrontation. Most people, when faced with overwhelming odds, showed fear or anger or desperation. This stranger showed nothing but calm preparation. You know what your problem is, old man? The leader said, his voice rising as he tried to reclaim control of the situation. You think those tattoos mean something. You think people are supposed to be impressed. He gestured broadly to his own gang. Well, guess what? We've all been to war too. The war on the streets. And that's a war that never ends. The stranger nodded thoughtfully. The streets can be rough, he agreed, but they're nothing like Fallujah, or Helmand Province, or the places where the government sends people like me when they need problems to disappear quietly. One of the younger bikers, a man with a mohawk and multiple facial piercings, had been studying the stranger's tattoos more carefully. His face had gone pale as he recognized more of the symbols. Boss, he whispered urgently, I think he's— Shut up, Danny, the leader snapped. I don't care if he's John Wayne himself. It's 7 against 1. Actually, the stranger said conversationally, those aren't very good odds for you. The leader stared at him in disbelief. Did you just say 7 against 1 isn't fair? The stranger continued. For you, I mean. See, in my experience, most people who rely on numbers to win fights haven't learned how to actually fight. They've learned how to intimidate, how to overwhelm, how to make the other guy give up before it starts. But they haven't learned what to do when the other guy doesn't give up. Sarah watched in fascination and terror as the dynamic in the room shifted completely. The bikers who had entered like conquering heroes now looked uncertain and nervous. Their leader was still talking tough, but even he seemed to be having second thoughts. You're insane, the leader said, but his voice had lost its edge. Nobody's that good. The stranger reached into his back pocket slowly, making sure his movements were visible and non-threatening. He pulled out a worn leather wallet and opened it, revealing something to the leader that made the big man's face go white. What is that? Mike whispered to Sarah, who could only shake her head. From their angle, they couldn't see what was in the wallet. But whatever it was had a profound effect on the bikers. The spiderweb tattoo man was backing toward the door now, no longer trying to hide his retreat. I'm out of here, he announced. This is way above my pay grade. Nobody leaves. The leader shouted, but his authority was crumbling. 2 more of his gang members were already following the spiderweb man toward the exit. The stranger closed his wallet and put it away. Smart boys, he said approvingly. They know when they're outclassed. What the hell was in that wallet? The leader demanded. Identification, the stranger replied simply. The kind that explains why I'm not worried about 7 to 1 odds. Marcus had served briefly in the Army Reserves years ago, and he was starting to piece together what was happening. The tattoos, the calm confidence, the identification that had spooked hardened criminals. This wasn't just any veteran. This was someone from the very top tier of the military. Someone who had operated at levels most people never knew existed. The Mohawk biker was now pulling on his leader's jacket. Come on, man. This isn't worth it. There's plenty of other places to have fun. But the leader was trapped by his own reputation. He had built his status on never backing down, on being willing to fight anyone, anywhere. If he walked away now, word would spread throughout the biker community that he had been scared off by one old man. His authority would be finished. I've had enough of this psychological warfare bullshit, he snarled, reaching inside his jacket. Let's see how tough you are when— He never finished the sentence. The stranger moved with a speed that seemed impossible for a man his age. One moment he was standing calmly 3 feet away. The next he was directly in front of the leader, his hand wrapped around the biker's wrist in a grip that made the bigger man gasp in pain. I wouldn't, the stranger said quietly. His voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath now. Whatever you're reaching for, I promise you don't want to introduce it to this conversation. The leader tried to pull free, but the stranger's grip was like a vice. Years of hard living and violence had made the biker strong, but this was a different kind of strength. Precise, controlled, and absolutely unbreakable. Let go of me, the leader growled through gritted teeth. Soon as you remove your hand from inside that jacket, the stranger replied. Empty hand, nice and slow. The standoff lasted for several seconds that felt like hours. Finally, the leader slowly withdrew his hand, revealing nothing more threatening than a pack of cigarettes. The stranger released his grip and stepped back, but his posture remained ready. Good choice, the stranger said. Violence should always be the last resort, not the first. The remaining bikers were now clustered near the door, clearly wanting to leave, but unwilling to abandon their leader completely. The Mohawk biker spoke up again. Boss, come on. This place isn't worth the trouble. For a moment, it looked like the leader might listen to reason. His hand was still throbbing from the stranger's grip, and the demonstration of speed and control had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. But then he looked at Sarah sitting terrified in her booth, and his ego overrode his common sense. You know what? He said, his voice getting louder again. I don't care who you are or what you used to be. This is my territory now, and I don't take orders from anybody. He turned toward Sarah's table. The girl's still coming with us. That's when the stranger's entire demeanor changed. The polite conversational tone disappeared, replaced by something cold and final. No, he said simply. She's not. The single word carried such absolute authority that everyone in the bar felt it. This wasn't a threat or a challenge. It was a statement of fact delivered by someone who had the power to make it true. The leader spun back toward the stranger, his face red with rage. "You think you can just—" He never got to finish that sentence either. This time the stranger's movement was so fast that several people in the bar missed it entirely. One moment the leader was advancing aggressively. The next he was on the floor, gasping for breath and staring up at the ceiling with a look of complete shock. The stranger stood over him, his expression unchanged. "Like I said," he told the fallen biker quietly, "talking was never my strongest skill." The bar erupted into chaos. The remaining bikers, seeing their seemingly invincible leader flat on his back, didn't know whether to fight or flee. The Mohawk biker made the decision for them by bolting toward the door, followed immediately by the others. In seconds, only the leader remained, still struggling to catch his breath on the dusty floor. Marcus couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. The stranger had moved like lightning, but there had been no wild swinging, no brutal beating. It had been surgical, one precise movement that had ended the confrontation immediately. The biker leader was clearly stunned but not seriously injured, more shocked than hurt. Sarah found her voice at last. "Oh my God," she whispered, looking at the stranger with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." The stranger turned toward her table, and his expression softened back to the grandfatherly kindness he had shown when he first entered the bar. "No need to thank me, miss," he said gently. "Just glad I could help." The leader on the floor rolled over and slowly pushed himself to his hands and knees, his leather jacket scuffed and his dignity in tatters. "This isn't over," he wheezed, trying to salvage some pride from the humiliating defeat. The stranger looked down at him with something that might have been pity. "Son, it was over before it started. You just didn't realize it yet." He reached into his wallet again and pulled out a business card, dropping it next to the fallen biker. "When you get home tonight, have someone look up that organization. Then think real hard about whether you want to keep making threats you can't back up." The biker leader grabbed the card and squinted at it, his eyes still watering from whatever the stranger had done to put him down so quickly. As he read, his face went through several emotions: confusion, recognition, and finally, genuine fear. "You're—" he started to say, then stopped, apparently deciding that some things were better left unspoken. "I'm a retired man trying to enjoy a quiet beer," the stranger replied. "And you're someone who's about to make better life choices, aren't you?" The leader nodded quickly, all his earlier bravado completely gone. He struggled to his feet, swaying slightly, and looked around the bar as if seeing it for the first time. His gang was long gone, his reputation was in ruins, and he had just been casually dismantled by a man old enough to be his grandfather. We didn't know," he mumbled, backing toward the door. "Of course you didn't," the stranger said, not unkindly. "But now you do. And knowledge is power, son. Use it wisely." The biker leader stumbled out of the bar, leaving only the sound of a motorcycle engine starting up and then quickly fading into the distance. The other patrons slowly began to relax, though conversations remained whispered and everyone kept glancing at the stranger with newfound respect. Marcus set down his baseball bat and came around the bar, extending his hand to the stranger. "I don't know what you did or who you are," he said, "but thank you. Those guys have been terrorizing folks around here for months." The stranger shook his hand with a firm grip. "Just happened to be in the right place at the right time," he said modestly. "Though I have to say you run a nice establishment here. Shame to see it troubled by punks like that." Sarah approached cautiously, still shaky from the encounter. "I'm Sarah," she said, offering her hand, "and I owe you more than I can ever repay." "Jack Morrison," the stranger replied, taking her hand gently. "And you don't owe me anything. That's what decent people do for each other." Mike and Jenny joined them, both looking stunned by what they had witnessed. "I've never seen anything like that," Mike said. "It was like you barely touched him and he just went down," Jack smiled. 40 years of training and experience," he said. "You learn a few things along the way." "What exactly did you do?" Jenny asked. "I mean, if you don't mind me asking." Jack rolled his sleeves back down, covering the tattoos that had told such a dramatic story. "Military," he said simply. "Special operations. The kind of work where you learn that the best fight is the one that ends quickly." Marcus poured Jack a fresh beer, waving away his attempt to pay. "On the house," he insisted. "For life." "What unit were you with?" Can't really talk about most of it, Jack replied, taking a sip of the beer. But let's just say I spent a lot of years in places where diplomatic solutions weren't always possible. Sarah sat down across from him, still processing what had happened. That card you showed him, what was on it? Jack's expression became serious. Contact information for some people who keep track of certain things. Let's just say that young man is going to have a very educational conversation with someone about appropriate behavior in civilized society. The implications of that statement hung in the air. Mike cleared his throat nervously. You mean like government people? I mean like people who make sure that predators don't prey on innocent folks, Jack said carefully. The kind of people who take a dim view of gangs that terrorize small communities. Marcus whistled low. So this isn't just going to blow over. They're really going to face consequences. Oh, they're going to face consequences, Jack confirmed. That young man's name is going into a database along with his associates. If they continue their current lifestyle, they're going to find themselves under a microscope they really don't want to be under. Sarah leaned forward. But what if they come back? What if they try to retaliate? Jack's expression became absolutely certain. They won't, he said simply. Trust me on that. By tomorrow morning, they're going to be so focused on cleaning up their act that they won't have time to think about revenge. Jenny looked confused. I don't understand. What kind of power do you have? Jack smiled, but it wasn't entirely pleasant. The kind that comes from spending decades protecting this country from people who want to hurt innocent Americans. Some habits die hard, and some networks never really retire. The bar had gradually returned to normal, though everyone was giving Jack's table a respectful distance. Word was already spreading through whispered conversations about what had happened, and Jack could feel the attention even though people were trying to be discreet about it. I should probably get going, he said, finishing his beer. Don't want to make folks uncomfortable. Are you kidding? Marcus said. You're welcome here anytime. Hell, you're welcome to move in if you want. Sarah stood up as Jack prepared to leave. Wait, she said. I need to know, how do I thank someone for probably saving my life? Jack paused, considering the question seriously. You live it well, he said finally. You take care of the people you love. You stand up for what's right when you can. And you remember that there are still good people in the world willing to fight for strangers. He headed toward the door, then stopped and turned back. And maybe, he added with a genuine smile, you finish celebrating your birthday properly. Don't let a few punks ruin what should be a happy night. As he reached the door, Mike called out, Mr. Morrison, will we see you again? Jack looked back at the group of young people, then at Marcus behind the bar, and finally at the comfortable, worn interior of the establishment that had become the scene of such drama. Oh, he said with a chuckle. I think I'll be back. This place has good beer and interesting company. Plus, he added, his eyes twinkling with mischief, I never did finish that chapter I was reading. 3 days later, Detective Ray Castellanos was having the worst morning of his career. He sat across from FBI agent Maria Santos in the cramped interview room of the county police station, staring at a file that kept getting thicker every hour. What had started as a simple assault report had mushroomed into something far more complex and troubling. So let me get this straight, Detective Castellanos said, rubbing his temples where a headache was building. Tommy the Tank Morrison, leader of the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club wanted in 3 states for various felonies, walks into the FBI field office yesterday morning and surrenders himself. Agent Santos nodded, her expression grim. Surrendered himself, provided detailed confessions to crimes spanning the last 5 years, and gave us the locations of enough stolen merchandise to fill a warehouse. He also provided names, dates, and evidence for activities involving drug trafficking, extortion, and assault. And he did all this because some old guy in a bar scared him? According to Morrison's statement, yes. He claims he was shown identification that convinced him he was dealing with someone from a classified military unit. Says he realized he was way out of his league and decided to make things right before it got worse. Detective Castellanos looked at the business card in the evidence bag, the same card that Jack Morrison had dropped next to the biker leader. The card was simple white cardstock with only a phone number and an official-looking seal. You call this number yet? We tried, Agent Santos replied. It routes to a voice message system that requires security clearance codes we don't have. But we did run the name Jack Morrison through our databases. She slid a thin file across the table. Detective Castellanos opened it and found himself looking at the most heavily redacted document he had ever seen. Black bars covered almost everything except basic demographic information and a few tantalizing fragments. Jack Morrison, age 62, retired military, he read aloud. Service record classified. Operations classified. Current status classified. This tells me nothing. Exactly, Agent Santos said. Which tells us everything. Files only get redacted like that for people involved in the most sensitive operations. Black Ops, Special Forces, intelligence work. The kind of stuff that never makes it into official histories. Detective Castellanos studied the booking photo of Tommy Morrison from his surrender. The normally defiant biker looked genuinely terrified, his usual swagger completely absent. What exactly did he say happened in that bar? Agent Santos consulted her notes. Morrison claims the subject, Jack Morrison, demonstrated advanced hand-to-hand combat skills, displayed military tattoos indicating special operations service, and showed identification that convinced Morrison he was dealing with someone who had government connections at the highest levels. Government connections, the detective repeated skeptically. Sounds like conspiracy theory nonsense to me. Maybe, Agent Santos replied. But here's the thing. Morrison isn't the only one who's suddenly developed a conscience. In the last 48 hours, we've had 17 members of various motorcycle clubs come forward with confessions. Not just Iron Wolves. Members of the Devil's Disciples, the Road Reapers, and the Steel Serpents have all walked into law enforcement offices across 3 counties. Detective Castellanos stared at her. 17 guys just decided to confess to felonies? All at the same time? All citing the same reason. They received phone calls advising them that their activities were under review and that cooperation would be strongly recommended. The calls all came from the same number. The number on this card? Bingo. Detective Castellanos leaned back in his chair, trying to process what he was hearing. So we have some kind of vigilante running around the county, intimidating criminals into confessing? Or we have a retired military specialist using his connections to clean up the area through unofficial channels, Agent Santos suggested. The question is, do we investigate him or do we send him a thank you note? Before Detective Castellanos could respond, there was a knock on the interview room door. Officer Janet Powell stuck her head inside, looking flustered. Sorry to interrupt, she said, but we just got a call from Marcus down at O'Malley's Tavern. Says he needs to speak with whoever's handling the Morrison case. Claims he has information about what really happened that night. Detective Castellanos exchanged glances with Agent Santos. Send him in, he said. Marcus entered the interview room a few minutes later, his weathered hands nervously gripping a coffee cup. He looked around the sterile environment like a fish out of water, clearly uncomfortable with being in a police station. Mr. O'Malley, Detective Castellanos began. Thank you for coming in. We understand you witnessed the incident between Jack Morrison and the biker gang. Marcus nodded slowly. That's right, but I'm not sure incident is the right word for what I saw. He paused, collecting his thoughts. Look, I've been running that bar for 15 years. I've seen plenty of fights, plenty of tough guys trying to prove something. What happened the other night was different. Different how? Agent Santos asked, leaning forward. The old guy, Jack, he wasn't trying to prove anything. He was just handling business, like a professional. Marcus took a sip of his coffee. My nephew served 2 tours in Afghanistan. When he came back, he had the same quality about him. This calm way of dealing with trouble that told you he'd seen real action. Detective Castellanos made a note. Can you describe exactly what you saw? The bikers came in looking for trouble. 7 of them, led by that Tommy Morrison character. They were harassing a young woman, threatening people, making everyone scared. Marcus's voice hardened with the memory. Jack tried to handle it peacefully at first. Real polite, real respectful. But when they wouldn't listen, what happened then? Fastest thing I ever saw, Marcus replied, shaking his head in amazement. Tommy went for something inside his jacket, probably a weapon, and Jack just moved. 1 second Tommy was standing, the next he was on the floor gasping like a fish. No wild punches, no big dramatic fight scene, just one precise movement and it was over. Agent Santos consulted her notes. Morrison claims that Jack showed him some kind of identification that frightened him. Did you see this? I saw him show Tommy something from his wallet. Couldn't see what it was from where I was standing, but whatever it was sure changed Tommy's attitude real quick. Marcus paused. But honestly, it was the tattoos that really got their attention. The tattoos? Military ink. The real deal. Not the fake stuff you see sometimes. Eagle and anchor, unit numbers, coordinates. The kind of tattoos that tell stories about places most people have never heard of. Marcus looked directly at Detective Castellanos. My nephew has some similar work. Says you can always tell the difference between someone who's been to war and someone who just likes to look tough. Detective Castellanos was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Mr. O'Malley, in your opinion, was Mr. Morrison acting in self-defense? Self-defense? Marcus almost laughed. Detective, if Jack Morrison had wanted to hurt those boys, they'd still be in the hospital. What I saw was a man using just enough force to end a dangerous situation. No more, no less. Agent Santos leaned back in her chair. Has Mr. Morrison been back to your establishment since that night? Every evening, Marcus replied with a slight smile. Same corner booth, same beer, same paperback novel. Acts like nothing happened. Customers treat him like a hero, but he just nods politely and keeps to himself. Any sign of retaliation from the motorcycle clubs? That's the strange part, Marcus said. Word got around the biker community real fast about what happened. But instead of making them angry, it seems to have made them respectful. Had 3 different club members come by the bar in the last 2 days, not to cause trouble, but to apologize for their associates' behavior. Detective Castellanos and Agent Santos exchanged meaningful looks. This corroborated what they were hearing from other sources. The entire local criminal ecosystem seemed to be reorganizing itself around avoiding conflict with Jack Morrison. Mr. O'Malley, Agent Santos said carefully, do you have any idea what kind of military background Mr. Morrison might have? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly debating how much to share. Look, he said finally, I don't know specifics and I don't ask questions I don't want answers to. But I'll tell you this, that man has seen combat. Real combat, the kind where people don't come home. How can you be so certain? Because of how he handles himself. Because of the way he watches doors and exits. Because when those bikers came in making noise and threats, he didn't get angry or scared or excited. He just got ready. Marcus finished his coffee and set the cup down firmly. And because when it was over, he didn't gloat or celebrate or tell war stories. He just went back to reading his book like nothing had happened. Detective Castellanos made another note. Is there anything else you think we should know? Marcus stood up, preparing to leave. Just this. Jack Morrison isn't a vigilante or a troublemaker. He's a man who stepped up when innocent people were in danger. If more folks were willing to do that, you'd probably be out of a job. After Marcus left, Detective Castellanos and Agent Santos sat in silence for several minutes. Each lost in their own thoughts. So what do we do? Detective Castellanos asked finally. Agent Santos gathered her files. Officially, we closed the case. No crime was committed. No complaint was filed by the alleged victim. And we have multiple witnesses stating that Mr. Morrison acted in defense of others. And unofficially? Unofficially, we keep our ears open and our eyes peeled. Because something tells me Jack Morrison's story isn't over yet. 2 weeks after the incident at O'Malley's Tavern, Jack Morrison had settled into a comfortable routine. Every evening around 6 o'clock, he would walk the 3 blocks from his small apartment to the bar, order a beer and a simple dinner, and spend a few hours reading in his corner booth. The other patrons had grown accustomed to his presence, offering respectful nods when he arrived, but generally leaving him to his solitude. What Jack didn't know was that his quiet evenings were being closely monitored by someone with far more resources and connections than the local police department. Colonel Elizabeth Hayes sat in her Pentagon office, studying a surveillance report that had landed on her desk that morning. The report detailed the activities of one Jack Morrison, former Navy SEAL and recipient of more classified commendations than most people had regular medals. According to the intelligence, Morrison had been living quietly in a small town for the past 6 months, apparently enjoying his retirement, until 2 weeks ago, when he had single-handedly dismantled a criminal organization that had been operating in the area for years. Colonel Hayes picked up her secure phone and dialed a number that only a handful of people in the world had access to. It was answered on the first ring. Morrison, came the familiar voice. Hello, Jack, Colonel Hayes said. It's been a while. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Jack was sitting in his usual booth at O'Malley's, but his posture had suddenly become more alert. He recognized the voice immediately. Colonel Hayes had been his commanding officer during some of the most dangerous missions of his career. "Beth," he said quietly, using the informal name he had earned the right to use after years of successful operations. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Were you now?" Colonel Hayes smiled despite herself. Jack had always been able to anticipate developments before they became official. And why might that be? Because 17 motorcycle club members suddenly developing consciences and confessing to federal crimes tends to attract attention from people like you. Colonel Hayes consulted the file in front of her. "According to my sources, you convinced them to see the error of their ways through the power of conversation." "Something like that," Jack replied, taking a sip of his beer. Around him, the bar continued its normal evening rhythm, completely unaware that one of their regulars was having a classified conversation with someone in the highest levels of military intelligence. "Jack, we need to talk. In person. I'm retired, Beth, have been for 2 years now. Enjoying the civilian life, I know. And you've earned that retirement more than most. But something's come up. Something that requires your particular skill set." Jack was quiet for a moment, watching Marcus wipe down glasses behind the bar. He had hoped that part of his life was behind him, that he could spend his remaining years reading books and enjoying simple pleasures. But he also knew that people with his background were never truly retired. They were just on extended leave until their country needed them again. "What kind of something?" he asked finally. "The kind we can't discuss over the phone, even on a secure line. Can you be in Washington tomorrow?" Jack looked around the comfortable bar, at the people who had become part of his daily routine. Sarah had come by several times since the incident, always stopping to chat and express her gratitude. Marcus had become a friend, someone Jack could talk to about everyday things without having to watch every word for security implications. "This isn't a request, is it?" Jack said. "You know me better than that," Colonel Hayes replied. "When have I ever made requests?" Despite the seriousness of the conversation, Jack found himself smiling. Colonel Hayes had been demanding, exacting, and completely uncompromising throughout their professional relationship. She had also been the best commanding officer he had ever served under, someone who understood the weight of sending people into situations from which they might not return. "What time?" he asked. "There's a car coming to pick you up at 0600. Pack light. This shouldn't take more than a few days." Jack noticed that several people in the bar were trying not to stare at him. He realized his conversation, while conducted in low tones, had taken on the crisp, professional cadence of his military days. Old habits emerging without conscious thought. "Beth," he said, "I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person I was 2 years ago. I've gotten comfortable with peace and quiet. I like knowing that when I go to sleep at night, I'm going to wake up in the same bed." "I understand," Colonel Hayes said, and her voice carried genuine sympathy. "But Jack, you're the only person we have who can handle this particular situation. And if we don't handle it correctly, a lot of innocent people are going to get hurt." Jack closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. It was the same choice he had faced dozens of times throughout his career. Personal comfort versus duty. Individual desires versus the greater good. And despite his hopes for a quiet retirement, he knew there was really only one answer he could give. 600, he repeated. "I'll be ready." "Thank you, Jack. I know this isn't easy." After Colonel Hayes hung up, Jack sat quietly in his booth for several minutes, processing what had just happened. His peaceful civilian life was about to be interrupted, possibly permanently. The thought filled him with a mixture of dread and, if he was honest with himself, anticipation. He had been a warrior for so long that civilian life, comfortable as it was, sometimes felt like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. Marcus approached his table, carrying a fresh beer. "Everything okay, Jack? You look like you got some heavy news." Jack accepted the beer gratefully. "Work calling," he said simply. "Thought you were retired." Apparently some kinds of work don't believe in retirement. Marcus sat down across from him, something he had never done before. "You know, in all the time you've been coming here, you've never talked about what you used to do." "Not specifically." Jack took a long drink of his beer. "That's because most of it isn't the kind of thing you discuss over dinner. But it was important work." "I thought so. Still do." Marcus leaned forward. "And now they want you to do more of it. Jack nodded. Looks that way. You going to go? Jack looked around the bar one more time, taking in the comfortable atmosphere, the friendly faces, the simple pleasure of being just another customer in a neighborhood establishment. Tomorrow he would be back in a world of classified briefings, tactical assessments, and life-or-death decisions. Yeah, he said finally. I'm going to go. Marcus stood up and extended his hand. Well, for what it's worth, I'm proud to know you. Whatever you did before, whatever you're going to do next, this country's lucky to have people like you. Jack shook his hand, touched by the simple sincerity of the gesture. Thanks, Marcus. That means more than you know. As Marcus returned to his duties behind the bar, Jack opened his paperback novel and tried to focus on the story, but his mind kept drifting to the conversation with Colonel Hayes, wondering what situation could be serious enough to pull him back into active service. Whatever it was, he suspected his quiet evenings at O'Malley's Tavern were about to become a fond memory. The only question was whether he would ever be coming back to reclaim them. 6 months later, Jack Morrison pushed through the familiar door of O'Malley's Tavern, the brass bell announcing his arrival with the same cheerful chime it had always made. The sound seemed louder somehow, more welcoming than he remembered. He paused just inside the entrance, taking in the sight of the place that had become his sanctuary before duty had called him away. Marcus looked up from behind the bar, and his face broke into a wide grin. Well, I'll be damned, he called out, his voice carrying across the room. Look what the cat dragged in. Several of the regular customers turned to see who had caused such enthusiasm from the normally reserved bartender. When they recognized Jack, a spontaneous round of applause broke out. Jack raised his hand in acknowledgement, embarrassed by the attention but touched by the warm reception. Buy that man a beer, called out Frank Hendricks, a retired postal worker who occupied a stool at the far end of the bar most evenings. On me. Hell, buy him dinner too. Jack made his way to his old corner booth, noting with amusement that it had remained unoccupied despite the bar being busier than usual for a Tuesday evening. As he settled into the familiar seat, Marcus appeared with a cold beer and a menu. So, Marcus said, sliding into the seat across from him. You look like you've got some stories to tell. Jack studied his old friend's face, noting the genuine concern beneath the casual greeting. Marcus had aged a bit in the 6 months since Jack had left. His hair a little grayer, the lines around his eyes a little deeper, but his eyes held the same warmth and straightforward honesty that had made their friendship possible. Some stories, Jack agreed, but not the kind I can share over dinner. Figured as much. You look different, though. More settled, maybe? Jack considered this. The mission that had pulled him back into service had been unlike anything in his previous experience. Not a combat operation or a rescue mission, but something far more complex and ultimately more satisfying. He had spent 6 months working with a joint task force to dismantle an international trafficking network, using his skills not to eliminate targets but to save lives and build cases that would hold up in court. Different assignment this time, he said carefully. More focus on building things up than tearing things down. Marcus nodded, understanding. He had learned not to press for details, but he was skilled at reading between the lines. Sounds like it agreed with you. It did. But I'm glad to be back. The door chimed again, and Jack looked up to see Sarah entering with the same 2 friends who had been with her on that frightening night 6 months ago. She spotted him immediately, and her face lit up with genuine delight. Jack, she exclaimed, hurrying over to his table. When did you get back? About an hour ago, Jack replied, standing to accept her enthusiastic hug. How have you been, Sarah? Good, really good. And you'll never guess what happened. She gestured to her friends who had followed her over. Mike and I are engaged. Jack looked at the young man who had tried so bravely to protect Sarah that night, noting the confident way he now carried himself. Congratulations, he said sincerely, shaking Mike's hand. That's wonderful news. It's partly because of you, Sarah said. What happened that night, seeing how you stepped up to help strangers? It made us both realize how important it is to be with someone who'll stand up for what's right. Mike nodded agreement. I've been taking self-defense classes too. Nothing fancy, but I figured I should learn to protect the people I care about. Jack felt a warm satisfaction at this news. Sometimes the most important victories weren't the dramatic ones that made headlines, but the quiet personal growth that rippled outward from difficult moments. That's smart thinking, Jack said, but I hope you never have to use it. Actually, Jenny chimed in, The whole town's been different since that night. Word got around about what happened here, and it's like people remembered that they don't have to just accept bad behavior from bullies. Marcus rejoined the conversation, having given them time for their reunion. "She's not wrong," he said. "We've had 3 different incidents where local folks stood up to troublemakers instead of just hoping someone else would handle it. Nothing dramatic, just people finding their backbone." Jack absorbed this information with quiet satisfaction. The mission Colonel Hayes had sent him on had been successful beyond all expectations. But learning that his brief intervention at O'Malley's had inspired others to take responsibility for their community was an unexpected bonus. Sarah and her friends eventually returned to their own table, but the conversations continued throughout the evening. Jack found himself talking with people he had only nodded to before his departure, learning about their lives, their concerns, their hopes for the community. As the evening wound down and the crowd began to thin, Marcus approached Jack's table with 2 beers and a serious expression. "So," Marcus said, settling into his usual seat across from Jack, "are you back to stay this time?" Jack considered the question carefully. "I think so. The work I was doing. It's important, and there's more of it to be done, but they've got good people handling it now, people who don't have as much mileage on them as I do. And you're okay with that? Stepping back while others take the lead?" Jack smiled, remembering a conversation he'd had with Colonel Hayes just 3 days earlier. She had offered him a permanent position with the task force, a chance to continue the work that had given him such satisfaction. But she had also understood when he declined, recognizing that some warriors earned the right to choose their battles. "I spent 40 years of my life being ready to go anywhere, do anything, fight anyone who threatened innocent people," Jack said. "And I'm proud of that service. But I've reached a point where I think I can do more good by being a positive presence in one small community than by chasing problems all over the world." Marcus raised his beer in a toast. "To positive presence," he said. "To coming home," Jack replied, clinking his bottle against Marcus's. As they sat in comfortable silence, Jack reflected on the journey that had brought him back to this corner booth. The mission with Colonel Hayes had reminded him why he had chosen a life of service, but it had also shown him that service could take many forms. Protecting a frightened young woman from predators was just as important as any classified operation he had ever undertaken. The bell above the door chimed one last time as the final customers of the evening departed, leaving only Jack and Marcus in the quiet bar. Marcus began his closing routine, but there was no hurry in his movements. They both knew this was a conversation that needed time to unfold properly. "You know," Marcus said as he wiped down tables, "I never did find out what was in that wallet you showed Tommy Morrison, the thing that scared him so badly." Jack pulled out his wallet and opened it, revealing a simple military identification card. But beneath it, almost hidden, was another card, one that bore only a phone number and an official seal that most people would never recognize. "Emergency contact information," Jack said simply, "for people who keep track of certain things." Marcus looked at the card but didn't ask to examine it more closely. "And those people, they're still keeping track?" "They're always keeping track," Jack replied. "But the nice thing about small towns is that once word gets around about what happens to people who prey on innocent folks, most of the predators decide to hunt elsewhere." As Marcus finished his closing duties, Jack sat quietly in his booth, watching his friend work and thinking about the choices that had led him to this moment. He had spent most of his adult life in service to his country, often in places where the work was dangerous and the recognition non-existent. But sitting here in this simple neighborhood bar, surrounded by people who had become friends, he realized that this might be the most important mission of all. Protecting not just the country as an abstract concept, but the actual people who made up its communities. Being present not for dramatic confrontations with international terrorists, but for the small daily acts of decency that kept civilization functioning. Marcus turned off the last light and joined Jack at his table. "So what now?" he asked. Jack finished his beer and stood up, leaving money on the table that was far more than the cost of his drinks. "Now I go home, get a good night's sleep, and tomorrow I start figuring out how to be a useful member of this community. Any ideas?" Jack smiled, thinking of the plans that had been forming in his mind during the long flight home. "A few. I'm thinking this town could use someone who knows how to teach people to protect themselves and others. Someone who understands that the best fights are the ones you prevent from happening in the first place. As they walked toward the door together, Marcus flipped the sign from open to closed and locked the door behind them. Outside, the small-town street was quiet and peaceful, lit by old-fashioned street lamps that gave everything a warm, golden glow. "Welcome home, Jack," Marcus said, extending his hand. "Thanks, Marcus," Jack replied, shaking his friend's hand firmly. "It's good to be back where I belong." As they walked in opposite directions toward their respective homes, Jack felt a sense of completion that he had never experienced before. He had served his country with honor, protected innocent people from those who would harm them, and earned the respect of his peers. But more than that, he had found a place where he could continue to make a difference. One quiet act of decency at a time. The eagle tattoo on his arm, hidden now beneath his jacket sleeve, represented decades of service in the shadows. But the man wearing it was finally ready to step into the light, to be not a mysterious force intervening in crises, but a steady presence helping to prevent those crises from occurring in the first place. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve his community and protect the people who had become important to him. But tonight, Jack Morrison was simply a man walking home through the peaceful streets of a small town, content in the knowledge that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is choose to stay and build something good, rather than leave to fight something bad. The story that had begun with a threat and a challenge had become something much more meaningful. A tale of how one person's courage could inspire others, how small acts of decency could transform communities, and how true strength was measured not by the enemies you defeated, but by the lives you improved simply by being present when you were needed most.